We got Phil calling in from Texas. Phil, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Gentlemen, Dan, we're so happy to have you back, and I'm so happy to meet Blatant Blatheist. I love that. I'm going to make my name Caucasiast.
Phil, I'm gonna directly advise that you do not do that. I think we should let Blatant Blatheist have his thing and just let it go, you know. But that's just my opinion, Phil. It's a free country.
That is referential and subordinating. I will not do that. Listen, before we get started, I have one bone to pick with you, Dan, personally.
All right, lay it on me.
I've come in second place on the joke thing 5 times in a row. And I'm convinced you're using Dominion voting machines, and I'm releasing the Kraken.
That's pretty good. We do have a lot of so what's great about this community is that if you pay attention, the same names do come up. And if you look at the comments every week, I mean, the funniest ones do come from the folks who are actively commenting every week. So it is kind of voted by consensus behind the scenes with everyone. It's not my decision. It's several people's decisions is how we pick that top 3. So no Dominion voting machines required. It's literally a cabal of secret Truth Wanted production team members. So it's even worse.
I'm delighted just to have placed. I'm fine with that. That's
great.
Not a problem.
That's good. That's good.
The reason I called, I've called you a number of times before. I follow a lot of crackpot channels, and every time, as politely as I can, I try to introduce a little bit of science or a little bit of common sense, I get blocked.
Yeah.
So I'm taking the opposite stance now. I'm pushing the envelope. I'm saying not only is the moon not real, the moon was created by Bigfoot. Just to see who I can bait in to comment on those things, because we're not going to make any headway trying to make sense. So let's make some nonsense.
Yeah, it's an interesting strategy. I think this kind of falls under the umbrella of what do you do when you see this kind of content? What's the counterattack measures? And I think I wish it was simple. I wish I could give you an exact formula, and it's not. It doesn't work. I think your strategy there, right, is kind of introducing a cognitive dissonance within people's beliefs, right? You're kind of saying, well, look, if you can make this presumption and come to this conclusion, why can't I make this presumption and come to an equally absurd conclusion, right? And that works if you folks like us who think about logic and think about rhetoric and think about all this stuff every day. But for the average person, it just may not work because it just sounds too outlandish, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of those kinds of conspiracy folks, it's a gradual understanding. You don't go to you don't become a conspiracy YouTube channel person because you read about one kind of conspiracy, right? You're usually looking into a lot of different connections that you're making from various sources. So I think it's one way to approach it, but it's not one that I'm a particularly good fan of, because honestly, I've just never seen good results from it. I've never really seen it go the way that I want it to do. But I don't know. What do you think, Blatant Blatheist?
With me, I actually tend to avoid interacting. I could watch and I can get my little entertainment feel out of it, but interacting, I'm gonna avoid, because if you're somebody who's already enthralled in conspiracy world, it doesn't matter what I say.
Yeah.
You can always logic your way out of any truth that I can give you. There's no actual truth wanted. It's just, I want to be right. That's the whole point of the conspiracy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to avoid that altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
That is,
I'm not, and Phil, I'll let you speak after this, but it's I see folks, if Alex Jones is tweeting something, right, and somebody's commenting under Alex Jones, oh, you're ridiculous. Do you genuinely think you're going to change Alex Jones's mind in 144 characters or whatever? No, the best you can do is help other people who are looking at that kind of content and help expose what that is. But the pushers, that's, I wouldn't even waste my time honestly.
Gay frogs are always going to be gay frogs.
Now I say that, but I'm a call-in show host for an atheist call-in show network. So maybe I'm the pusher for atheism, and maybe people would say they shouldn't waste their time with me. But I at least talk to people on the air. I don't know. I don't like, you know, put out a scripted video and then mute all my comments or something, right? Anyway, go ahead, Phil.
You were both precisely right, because the critical thinkers and the skeptics, they're not going to be swayed by Coast to Coast AM. And the true believers who believe they've been abducted by aliens, they're not going to be convinced. But I'm thinking of the 16-year-old who's dialing into these channels for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'm the catcher in the rye. I want to save that kid from believing bullshit if I can.
Yeah.
If I can. You know,
yeah, I do too.
Oh my God. The level of bullshit on YouTube now is extreme. Everything from vax deniers. Yeah, I mean, you name it. You name it. There's 1,000 different conspiracies out there. So I'm just, you know, how do we catch the people who are not committed yet to one side or the other?
I think a lot of people want to become so like first of all, the hardest working people in the community aren't folks like me who do live call-in shows. It's the folks who are doing those like deep dive debunks, who are really getting to the nitty gritty for the details, for the folks who really want that. Okay. I think those are the real heroes in our community. But for the rest of us who don't have the expertise or the time to do that, it comes from our casual conversations with the people around us. And it sounds powerless and it sounds hopeless, because it kind of is, but at the same time, it's kind of not, because the truth is I'm going to be the most influential person in my friend's life, maybe way more than any person that my friend watches online. I mean, that may not always be the case. They may think more highly of some of those people than they do of me, but we're more likely to influence the people around us in real space, right? In real life, than we ever are with people online. So I think if you're one of those kinds of people who really wants to like do that kind of activism and wants to talk to people, communicating in those spaces, I think is great. And I think it's a good exercise, and I think you can get stuff done with it. But I highly encourage people to reach out to those in your real life, because I almost guarantee you're going to make a bigger impact for the folks that you know than the folks that you don't have that prior relationship with. A lot of internet conversations start with, wow, this comment is stupid, I'm going to respond to it. And maybe they get a response back, and maybe there's a few things back and forth, and then you never talk to each other again. That's not a relationship. It's barely a dialogue, right? That you might as well be talking to yourself. It's you know, I really think
it's feeding the monster.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think, and yes, do other people view those comments and can they take something away from it? Absolutely, which is why I think it's still a good thing. But if you want to make the most impact, I don't think you'd have to start shows like this one. I think it really is just using what you've learned and talking to the people around you and providing those resources when you can. But we can't be experts on everything. I can't debunk every single new thing that comes out every day. I don't have the time. And quite frankly, I don't have the interest, because most people aren't believing in the real whack stuff. Some of it's just the more common stuff, like the vaccines and things like that, you know, stuff that's in the more common parlance than, say, reptilians from Mars, right? That's a very niche subcategory to me. That's
well, one of my favorite nut jobs channels that I watch is Gina Marie Colvin. And Gina Marie, maybe you know who she is, maybe you don't. She's a crackpot. And she is convinced that Cthulhu lives at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean.
Hell yeah.
At one point, I posted a comment.
Live your truth, Queen.
I posted a comment that...
I'm all about it. Anyway, no, I'm not. Sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, at one point, I pointed out that Cthulhu was invented by H.P. Lovecraft, a very weird guy, in 1927. Yeah. And I realized, and it's fictional, and I realize now what I should have said is, I have seen Cthulhu, and he drove me insane. That's why I'm here. You know, I should have pushed that envelope rather than try to push against it.
For that one, here's what I would have said. I get where you're coming from, but I would have went along the lines of actually the evidence would more point towards Cthulhu being located more towards the Mediterranean Sea. So where are you getting your facts from? Make her prove it. You know what I mean? I will present an alternate to the bullcrap that you're presenting and make you actually give me evidence, because you can just state anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So
that's a good tact.
To give you something to look into, Phil, this is something, listen, a communication degree a lot of people dunk on it, and yeah, you should, because it's not the same as other kinds of degrees, but you can learn some interesting things. One of the things I learned in my college curriculum is the Tolman method of argumentation. It's Toulman. If you're not familiar with this, there's this guy, Alan Tolman. No, Stephen Tolman. I just had to Google it. Sorry. Stephen Tolman came up with this idea of breaking down pretty much any kind of argument into about 4, 5, or 6 parts. And I won't go into detail about it here, but you can read about some of that on your own. And basically, if you're able to parse people's ideas and you're able to kind of break them down into these very simplistic syllogisms, very simplistic argument structures, you can help people analyze their own reasoning. And it's kind of an alternative to street epistemology in a way, if you do it right. And look at, okay, how do we piece together each part of this argument to where I can follow what you're saying in your conclusion? Sounds like maybe you're familiar with it, Phil. You're going to say?
I vaguely reference that, but I do know the argument. And I was going to say street epistemology. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I will, and thank you for that reference. I will go back and look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, street epistemology is great too.
A big part of the whole conspiracy theory, the whole flat Earth, we didn't land on the moon, you know, whatever conspiracy you want to name, I think it empowers people who don't know much about anything to feel like they're in the know. We have the real scoop on this. Everybody else is just fooling themselves. And that's a hard thing to combat. That's a very powerful, you know, self-persuader.
That's definitely part of it. There's flat Earth conventions and stuff, right? People talk about this and they're like, why does this thing exist? And it's because when you start to identify in the flat Earth community, I mean, that there is an identity there. You're rejected as a flat earther when they would call themselves truthers, or they would call themselves globalist global deniers, or, you know, there is a sense of community that comes out of these ideas. And I think that perplexes people who have grown up in the mainstream, who have just been a part of a regular church community or whatever, and don't have that same kind of alienation that comes with having a different perspective or a different sense of the world, right? We get this as atheists. That's why we have the atheist community of Austin. I mean, I think an institution like this is important so that we can talk about our own ideas and our own perspectives. But, you know, we're also going to be way more open doxastically, right, than communities like the flat Earth community. I in my opinion, I don't know. That's my take. But yeah, there is, I think you're right, a sense of community identity and empowerment that does come with sharing some of those ideas. I don't know. What do you think, Blatant Blatheist?
Yeah, I could not have said that better myself. And I've actually said pretty much that in several videos before, like that whole feeling that Phil was saying, like, I don't feel like I have control. I feel like an outcast, but this thing separates me from the sheep. It makes me feel special. It makes me feel like I have control. I know what they don't want me to know. You know what I mean? It gives you that empowerment. So yeah, I definitely see that's a tough spill to break.
Yeah. And to go even further on this idea, it can be an extension of trauma in some regards. You may be familiar with folks like what comes to mind is the Hotep community, right? Folks who have different interpretations of the lineage of Black Americans in particular, but Black people in general, but also Black Americans in particular. Different ideas about slavery, different ideas about their entire culture, and people have wondered why this specific cultural phenomenon exists. And it's often been speculated, or at least recently been speculated, that, like, look, to know the real truth of it, which is that life is just shitty and people are shitty and there's shitty institutions that affect people, that's almost too much to swallow. Same thing with other things, right? It's better to believe that there's a secret cabal of pedophile rich people that are controlling the world, and not just like, oh, capitalism is a thing and causes class division, and, you know, some people have more money than others and it's not due to necessarily anybody's fault. Like, that's just, it's easier to put it in the hands of people than it is, you know, forces.
It's just it literally is the same thing that creates religiosity. All this cannot be happening for nothing. There has to be a reason. And it's empowering to feel like I know the reason and I'm going to try to give it to you. And that makes you actually feel like you're special. It makes you feel like you have something to give to the world.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
Well,
It's a lot.
said. And you know, there always has to be the enemy, whether it's the Illuminati or the Masons or the Vatican or the Girl Scouts or the Cedar Creek Volunteer Fire Department. There always has to be some enemy to point at, to blame everything on.
Yeah,
and you know,
absolutely.
life is more complicated than that. We have a lot of enemies. There's not just one thing happening.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, gentlemen, I'll let you go. Thank you for taking my call. Blatheist, I'm so happy to find you. I will go to your channel. And Dan, I'm so happy you're okay, buddy.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Really appreciate it.